This week on the Lateral Line, I had the great pleasure of having a good friend Marcus out for a week of fishing. With terrible weather forecasted, we decided a super early start was in order to get to our destination, while the weather was still worthy of the dinghy. With gear unloaded and a healthy feed cooked up, it was pack the boat and head down to the beach to launch. We should have really come up with a name for the dinghy instead of calling it the dinghy all the time. You couldn't have asked for better conditions to get Marcus out for his first time dinghy fishing, and it was the perfect conditions for chasing kings. I met Marcus when living in Japan. I couldn't speak Japanese, and finding someone that spoke English was hard to find. One day at the gym, I heard some guy talking in English, so I moved on over, introduced myself, and kind of in a nice way befriended Marcus, as it was so nice to have someone to talk to again, as I love to chat, especially about fishing. Marcus and I over the next 3 years spent a fair bit of time together and slowly but surely became good friends. He taught me a lot about living in Japan, introduced me to all the right people to make the stay enjoyable, and in true Kiwi fashion, I wanted to repay the favour by bringing him to New Zealand, showing him our beautiful country and the fish that live in our waters. With Marcus now located in Singapore, it's a lot easier for him to make the flight down to New Zealand. He's more here for the relaxing and generally just hanging out with the boys. The fishing is by far the bonus, but he just wants to catch the snapper, trevally and kahawai, where I want him to get his arms stretched around the boat and get railed by monster kings. I got Marcus back into fishing. He did a lot of casting to get his casting arm back in, and we spent a good amount of time watching kings, but just not being able to get results. For Marcus, I think getting used to rocking around in the little boat after sitting behind a desk for a good year was probably enough for the day. When plans don't go to plan, it's best to put your tail between your legs and run for home. Eat some food, relax, and unwind. And by then, you are normally itching at the bit to get back out on the water once more. This is what we tried to do. We had a heavy forecast of rain and wind that was meant to be upon us, but had yet showed up. So we launched the boat, found the big schools of bait, caught said bait, and fantastically dragged them around massive shoals of kahawai. It was an incredible evening to be out on the water chasing giants. The ocean was alive with fish, and the storm was showing itself, but not quite unleashing its fury. With tired bodies, we made our way back to camp, showered and climbed into bed to do it all again tomorrow. With the weather turning for the worst, it was a hard wake-up, as you could hear the wind howling outside. I knew we were in for a hard day out on the rocks. There was going to be nothing pretty about today. But when you have great friends to impress, you put your big smile on, pull up your big boy pants, and grin and bear it. Deep down, I still wanted to go fishing. You take the time out of work, load the truck with all your belongings for a week-long fishing trip. Really, the hard stuff of getting away is done. Now you just need to fish and enjoy the hardships, all the rewards of fishing in the wild weather. Marcus had his reservations, but I assured him, Marcus, it would be awesome. We would rope ourselves onto a ledge, the wind would be at our backs, the fish would be biting, and it would be a great day land-based fishing. With Marcus pumping burley along the ledge, the snapper started to show, and once the snapper showed, the weather didn't matter. Next for Marcus was a kahawai, and that was quickly turned around into a live bait. Now I was happy I could sit back and enjoy the whole day as nothing mattered anymore. All I needed was a giant to turn up, and life would be awesome. When you want something bad enough, sometimes you manifest your future. I'll leave you with Dick Johnson's music and one hell of a fight on a big kingfish. And this episode of the Lateral Line is proudly brought to you by WiseAngler. By buying WiseAngler hooks, it allows Nathan and I the time to go out to create the lateral line. That fish made the trip for me, especially seeing it swim again. If we had 2 live baits, I think Marcus would have had a shot at the other kingfish that was there. And it was even bigger than the one we landed. That fish pretty much ended our morning mission, as the rain I said wouldn't come, came with vengeance. It poured down, and it became very unpleasant down on the rocks. Everything was wet, and the rocks became super slippery. So we packed all our gear down and made the walk out in the rain. To be fair, the wind had built and was now just charging with heaps of rain thrown in for good measure. We had empty tummies that needed to be filled, and we had been successful in our endeavours to catch a big kingfish for the trip. Now I had to focus on getting a fish for Marcus. Our formula was working though. Fish hard for a few hours, break, fill the bellies, rest the legs, relax, and then repack and go again. By the afternoon, the weather was looking beautiful once again. We still had the wind, but I had a spot in mind that produced kings in the past, and Marcus loves catching kahawai. So we headed on down to the river mouth, spun for kahawai for the afternoon, and generally just sat back and enjoyed the scenery while we had a live bait deployed waiting, just in case that big lone king swam the beach looking for a feed. It's happened so many times before. You just need to be at the right place at the right time, and luck just comes your way. With the forecast looking savage for the next few days, I suggested we pack down our gear, have a couple of days off, and then just fish the weather windows as they presented to us. We had a boat, truck, and a ton of burley, and lots of time. So it was just a matter of doing the Ks to find the fish. My normal spot in the harbour on the east coast hadn't been firing as well as what it should have been, due to it being spring and the water was full of bait. But after chatting to the boys, maybe the water was too good and too warm, and it was pushing the kingfish out of the harbour into maybe cooler waters, as the coast had good numbers of sub 20 kilo fish, but for some reason they just hadn't wanted to venture into the harbours. But where there is bait and current, there will be predator fish, and it's just a matter of doing the time on the water, working the structure the best way you know how. So that's what we did. We pulled the dinghy over the hill, raced up the harbour and started prospecting for bait. If every morning was as beautiful as today, you would never miss another. Being up early and seeing the sun break the horizon over the water is something special. As fishermen, we get to experience it on a regular occasion. And to share it with a good friend, even better. Marcus set to work slaying the kahawai. Only needed enough for bait, but Marcus just loves catching them. So away he went. Fishing brings something different to everyone, and I think that's what I love about the sport. I love live baiting for kings. Hamish loves making his own lures to catch kingfish. Luke loves big game fish and driving hard on them. Nathan loves creating scoots and then slowly minn coatering the coast. Pete, he just loves wading a river for trout and marrying Ivana. Lubin, well, he's a cod god for a reason. And Toby, well, he just loves the Chathams now and all that it has to offer. Fishing is just so different and changes as we age, and your experiences you have. It puts you into locations that sometimes you have to pinch yourself to make sure it's real. For us, today was all about spending time doing the rounds and finally drifting the right line to get Marcus hooked up to a hard-pulling king. I think it was the perfect kingfish to open his kingfish count for the trip, as he's always had this fear of hooking a giant and losing a saltiga over the side. We do have rules in the dinghy, so I don't imagine that would ever happen. First rule is never tangle the live bait. Second rule is always pump the burley. And number 3 is never let go of the rod. Marcus was pretty happy to be providing for the family. Not only did he catch his first kingfish for the trip, it was a young fish, full of fat, so it was going to be the perfect table fish. With no ice on board, we packed up and made haste for home. And once home, I worked my magic on the knife and got the fish broken down, while Chris pumped his tunes out the back. A feast best reserved for a king, sashimi, seafood chowder with Traeger smoked wings, Tonight was the night to turn up to the house for dinner. With the forecast so changeable, we made a plan to run to the west the very next day. I still wanted to hunt down a solid king for Marcus, and the weather gods must have known, as they gave us a 5-knot forecast. It was only a pocket of fine weather, with rain and wind surrounding us, but that's all we needed for a shot at the title. With boat launch, we made our way to the back of the harbour to find some bait. Harbours have always fascinated me with the life that they have in them. You can only but imagine what they would have been like before us humans started fishing in them. It would have been something out of this world. Imagine having the technology we have today back then to document it. You wouldn't watch fishing shows, you'll be watching fish in motion shows. What a privilege it would have been to be around back then with the technology we have now. The life in the back of the harbour was insane. The life was there, so hopefully the fish were there too. We loaded up on live baits and started to move around the harbour fishing the structure. The sun was out, the wind was down, the current was running, I think harder than I'd ever seen before, which brought its own issues as it destroyed the water quality. We worked the harbour hard without even seeing a fish. So in the end, we moved out to the heads, loaded up the burley bags and started to run a trail, in the hope that a big solo kingfish was running the shallow bays looking for an easy feed. Kawa were found and even a kelpie, but the kingfish stayed off the radar. So we made our way home with our tail between our legs. Fishing is such an interesting sport. You think you know the movements of fish and how to catch them. Spend months to learn it. And then when you think you know it all, then they change the rules of engagement on you. And you pretty much have to start from scratch. Harbour fish see a lot of anglers, and they become somewhat smart, if you could call them that. But there is something that they start to learn about their surroundings. At least if you start to interfere with those surroundings, by spooking them or even putting a boat into their environment, they know that to be not good, and they learn to move on to safer waters. With only one day left to hit the water, Marcus requested some snapper and trevally to take home, and maybe a kingfish if we could find one. That's one thing about New Zealand. The weather is so unsettled and you have to make the most of what you get. At least our last day on the water was going to be brilliant, to say the least. With gear ready, we started the process. Get on the water, pump a seriously good burley trail, catch a heap of live bait, load them up in the bin. Use the morning to fish the best spots. I would have to say 80% of the kingfish I've caught have been before lunchtime. Not saying afternoons aren't good. For me, the first 3 hours of daybreak are when we have our best kingfish success. Catch your bait first, so you know you have the live baits. So when you get to your spot, you are not reliant on having to produce live baits before you catch kings. Then current and structure. If you can find these two things together, you should have kings there at some stage of the tide. The structure could be a rock wall, like what we are fishing today, or it could be a marker pole or a buoy. It could be a sandbar, as where we caught our live baits this morning. Then it's just learning that spot, working out what part of the incoming or the outgoing tide is going to produce the fish. And the only way to learn that is by sitting back and enjoying your surroundings and soaking live baits. With Marcus landing another fat spring kingfish, it was time to head up the harbour for the start of our outgoing tide. Going and looking around the far reaches of the harbour is something quite mind-blowing. Some days a snapper and kingfish life in under a metre of water right at the back of the harbour really does blow your mind. The fish are normally there for one reason, and that's to eat. So when they see a lure or a bait, they are very keen to accept your offerings. This, I think, is where Marcus found his happy place. Flat water, burley pumping, and some really nice fish coming out of probably a metre of water. Both snapper and trevally are in huge numbers in the back of our harbours. So spending the time prospecting and finding the paths that the fish use to access the flats is the key to success. Think of the back of the harbour like cows in a paddock. Each day those fish move into the flats in massive schools, and they as a living organism move across the flat together, smashing bait, crabs, array of shellfish and worms. They harvest that flat, and the next day they might move across and do another part. That many fish consume a huge amount of food, so learning that path to the flats just opens up a whole new world to fishing. Thank you, Marcus, for an incredible week of hanging and enjoying what our country has to offer. I love having you here, and I look forward to the next time.